Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 504th episode, we've got a bunch of news.
Yes, including a new Stegosaur, Baiyinosaurus, plus an update on Daspletosaurus and it going through anagenesis.
Meaning how it evolved between species.
Yes, and also the theropod Elopteryx may be synonymized.
Well, a lot of lumping and splitting happening.
Mm-hmm.
We also have our Dino-all challenge. It's going to be our third scene, our third puzzle for you to help solve in this magical world where dinosaurs are showing up out of nowhere.
Magical, maybe slightly terrifying.
I guess the magic is in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
I think to most of us it would be really exciting, but it would still be a little scary.
Some of these puzzles involve predicaments that can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Dinosaur of the Day, Miragaia, which got a big update, and it kind of ties together our Stegosaur theme with our synonymization theme. And we've got a fun fact that the Ceratopsian Protoceratops may not be the inspiration behind the legendary Griffin.
Da-da-da. Because before I think we had a fun fact that it maybe was.
Mm-hmm.
Update.
Lots of updates in this episode.
But before we get into all of that, we want to thank some of our patrons for helping to make our podcast a reality. And this week we'd like to thank Rockoraptor and Kylosaurus, Brooke, Kentrosaurus, Ryan the Biochemist, Tricerabeth, Toon Rex, Jesse P, Perrin Sarolophus, and Taylor.
Yes, thank you so much for being a Dino-all. We hope you're enjoying the Dino-all challenge and all the perks that come with being in the community.
Yeah.
And if you want to join and get some of those perks, like a shout out
or ad-free episodes,
yes, then head over to patreon.com/iknowdino. Jumping into the news, there's a new Stegosaur in town.
It's in town?
If your town is in Gansu Province, China, I suppose.
Oh, there's a lot of people in that town.
Yeah. This is Baiyinosaurus baojiensis. It was published in Scientific Reports Open Access by Li Ning and others. And it lived in the Middle Jurassic, in what is now Gansu Province, China. It was found in the Wangjiashan Formation. It's one of the earliest Stegosaurs.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it is. And there's some unique features like the back vertebrae is unique, and also the frontal of the skull, that's the top part in the middle, is wider than it is long. Stegosaurs have been found on 5 continents, all but Antarctica and Australia, which I didn't realize. Maybe I should get more into Stegosaurs.
Stegosaurs are one of the less common of the dinosaur groups, so I'm actually kind of surprised it's been found on 5 out of 7 continents.
Yeah. Less common, but still very well known, or at least pretty famous.
Yeah, for sure. They were some of the first ones in movies and toys and all that kind of stuff. Those plates on Stegosaurus are pretty hard to ignore.
Yeah, and the Thagomisers. So Stegosaurs lived in the Jurassic and Cretaceous. The first dinosaur that was found in Gansu Province in China was back in 1930, and since then 17 dinosaurs have been discovered and named, including 5 sauropods, 3 theropods, 9 ornithischians, which includes an ankylosaur.
Nice. So then Ankylosaur beat the Stegosaur to the punch here?
I guess that's one way of looking at it, yes. And then in 2016, a team discovered a Stegosaur, several large theropods, and a sauropod, as well as a small theropod track site. And this paper is about the Stegosaur that they found.
Nice.
The holotype's a partial skeleton. It includes parts of the skull and jaws, vertebrae, including a neck bone, backbones, and a tailbone. It was probably an adult based on sutures being invisible on the back vertebrae, but there's not enough bones to know exactly how old it is.
Okay, so you got fused vertebrae, but we couldn't count lags.
Yes.
Because you didn't name any long bones. It was all basically head and vertebrae.
Yes. Maybe eventually they'll find some plates and some Thagomisers.
Hopefully. That's where the action is.
The type species is Baiyinosaurus baojiensis. The genus name Baiyinosaurus refers to Baiyin, which is the city where the fossils were found. And the species name baojiensis refers to Baoji, the basin name where the fossils were found.
Place name source, place name ensis.
Exactly. We should have included that one in our episode 500.
Yeah.
Oops.
It's a very popular move in China and elsewhere occasionally.
There are a lot of dinosaurs named after the places they were found.
Yeah. It's one thing that can never be wrong in the future because it's always going to have been found in that place. If you name it after being a raptor, it could turn out not to be a raptor. You name it fearsome, it could turn out to be an herbivore. But
what if the name of the place changes, like Istanbul, Constantinople?
Then it's just a historically accurate, historical name. Sometimes they even do that, intentionally name it after an older name for a place.
So Baiyinosaurus had features of both early thyreophorans and early diverging stegosaurs. And as a reminder, thyreophorans include both stegosaurs and ankylosaurs.
Okay, but you said it was a stegosaur, so they think it was after that split happened.
Yeah, but an early one, an early diverging stegosaur. And since it lived in the Middle Jurassic, and it's considered to be this transitional species, it may mean that there was a Middle Jurassic or earlier split between stegosaurs and ankylosaurs.
A long time ago.
Yeah. They do look fairly different.
Yes.
Baiyinosaurus is closely related to Gigantspinosaurus, which had large shoulder spines, as well as Jiangjunosaurus, which had a long skull, Alcovasaurus, which had long tail spines, and we'll actually get into Alcovasaurus in our Dinosaur of the Day. Spoilers. It's been lumped and split with Miragaia. And Isaberysaura, which had a skull almost as high as it is wide.
That's a tall head.
So yeah, that's the new Stegosaur.
I guess we can't say too much about how big it was or how impressive its thagomizer was or anything because we didn't really find any of that stuff.
Right.
Basically just the skull and a couple vertebrae to work with.
Yes. Enough to know it's a new dinosaur. And what type of new dinosaur? Moving on, there is a new study that reaffirms that Daspletosaurus species evolved into one another, also known as anagenesis. This was published by Elias Warshon and others in Cretaceous Research. Also open access. If anybody wants to read it, we'll have a link in our show notes. We interviewed Elias Warshon and Denver Fowler back in episode 418, where we talked about with them Daspletosaurus wilsoni, that's the newest named species, and when they first brought up anagenesis, at least for Daspletosaurus. But then there was a response, and maybe we shouldn't have been too surprised there was a response, because anagenesis is very hard to prove.
Yes.
There was a response that we talked about in episode 478 with this study by Scher and Voculescu-Holvad that basically talked about how hard anagenesis is to prove. The gist is that animals must be closely related. They have to be found in rock layers where they didn't overlap in time, so they weren't living at the same time. And they have to be found where it doesn't conflict with phylogeny, like the relationships between groups of animals. And they have to be found in similar areas. So there's 4 criteria, which I don't think they came up with. They were using that criteria from a previous paper. So they suggested that the 3 species of Daspletosaurus lived at the same time, so there was some overlap. And their phylogenetic analysis found different conclusions. They did approach it slightly differently. They found that the youngest species, Horneri, the one that lived most recently, was also the most basal, which wouldn't work with anagenesis.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Because that means it's farther up the family tree in a way, and it's also more recent.
Yes.
So it's like being your own grandpa sort of situation would be true if it was anagenesis.
Yeah, roughly. So in this latest paper, Warshon and others, they reinvestigated Tyrannosaurian relationships, and they revised the stratigraphic ranges of the Daspletosauruses to see if they did overlap in time. You know, like when exactly did these species live?
Okay, trying to narrow it down a little bit more.
And they also included some new specimens. There was a Dinosaur Park Daspletosaurus specimen that they included that was in the counter-argument study, as well as 2 additional Daspletosaurus specimens. So then they updated the data that they used. You have different characters. It's a character data set that you'll use to determine relationships between the dinosaurs. And then they included the modifications from the paper that was arguing against anagenesis. And they found that the new specimens had features seen in either Daspletosaurus taurusus or Daspletosaurus horneri, and they had a combination of ancestral and derived characteristics, so old and new features. They found no unique features in them, so they're not a new species, and they referred them to Daspletosaurus wilsoni. So we've got those are the three Daspletosaurus species.
Okay.
They found no overlap in time between the species, so only one species lived at a time. And they said that the overlap found in the previous study that argued against anagenesis was due to inaccurate species IDs and misinterpretations of the stratigraphy between the Judith River, Oldman, and Dinosaur Park formations, which I could see because it can be really hard to date rock.
Yes, and a lot of times there are these error bars on a formation, and you might say, oh, this formation is 70 to 74 million years old, for example. But if you're actually looking at the specific fossil, you might be able to narrow it down a little bit more and say it's in the top part or the bottom part and get more precise with your dating. And then when you're comparing between different areas, you have to be careful that you're not using too broad of error bars on one and narrower error bars on another one if you know more information.
And it's one of those things that I think gets refined over time.
Definitely.
Also. So then you can update your information. So in this study, they reaffirmed that, yes, Daspletosaurus species represent one lineage. There's anagenesis. The species evolved into the next species. They also found that Tyrannosaurini descended from Daspletosaurus, which would mean Daspletosaurus is ancestral to Tyrannosaurus rex.
Yes. Or at least that group that includes Tyrannosaurus rex.
Yes.
That's interesting. I'm not surprised that they doubled down on the anagenesis side of things, but it's still, I would say, far from proven.
Well, there might be more back and forth between different studies and different authors, so we'll see. We'll keep an eye out.
The sample size is still really small in terms of the number of animals, so depending on how you look at it, you might say the simplest explanation is they lived at the same time, and we just haven't found them in those exact times yet. Or you might say the simplest explanation is that they are changing.
Yeah.
Just depends what you're considering the null hypothesis, I guess, in statistical terms, what you think is the more likely scenario.
But if it is anagenesis, that's really cool because that is so rare to find.
Yeah.
Our last bit of news is about Elopteryx and how it might be this strange climbing dinosaur with a long tail, but also synonymous with Balaur.
So like Balaur Bondoc or something like that?
Yes, exactly. That name, Balaur Bondoc, means stocky dragon in Romanian.
I remember that name. It was a good one.
This was published by Vlad Stoescu and others in Northwestern Journal of Zoology. Elopteryx was one of the first dinosaurs discovered in Romania, and it was described mainly based on fragments of the femur, the thigh bone. It was our dinosaur of the day back in episode 474, but I'll give you a quick summary. It was a theropod that lived in the late Cretaceous on Hatzeg Island. It looked bird-like. It was named back in 1913, and there's been a lot of debate over what it was. Was it a bird, a troodontid, a maniraptor, an alvarosaurid?
It's a pretty broad group.
Yes. Although all theropods.
True. So they got that part figured out.
Yeah. So this new paper describes a new fragment, part of a right femur, and it's got a lot of characteristics in common with the Elopteryx holotype. And this bone was found inside a concretion. So being fragmentary, or only knowing a dinosaur from a few fragments, that makes Elopteryx a bit of a problematic taxon. The authors brought up a few other dinosaurs, like Balaur, which was named in 2010 based on a relatively well-preserved specimen found in what's now Romania. It includes tail bones, a shoulder girdle, pelvis, and multiple bone legs. And it had a very large first and second toe on each foot. It's considered to be avialan, and it possibly climbed trees based on its feet. It also could maybe perch. The authors also brought up Gargantuavis, which was a large primitive bird named in 1998, and the fossils have been found in Spain, France, and Romania. They include a pelvic bone and femur fragment.
I always like Gargantuavis.
Yeah.
The gargantuan bird.
With a wide pelvis. That's It probably had a terrestrial lifestyle too. The femur fragment had similarities to modern paleonaths, like ostriches. It probably didn't have a bony tail, and they don't think that this bird was a fast runner.
Sounds a little bit goofy.
Yeah.
It's got a wide pelvis. It's got similarities to ostriches, except slow. Probably couldn't climb, stuck on the ground.
Well, yeah. If you were to describe an ostrich, they might sound a bit goofy.
Yeah, except at least they're fast.
That's true. Then there's this new pelvis bone that was described in 2020 that's similar to Gargantuavis. It could be attributed to Elopteryx because the Elopteryx femur fragments fit together with it nicely. And also the femur fragments that have been referred to Gargantuavis may not belong to Gargantuavis because they were found isolated and unarticulated.
Oh, okay. You can't really use those as a major comparison point.
Yeah.
So they're not in the holotype.
So I bring this up because at one point, Elopteryx and Balaur were thought to be synonymous, but then later that got taken back because there just weren't enough fossils to compare the two. But it's possible that this pelvis, Elopteryx, and Balaur are synonymous, though the authors say, quote, a conclusion could be based only on more better preserved fossils. So it's another hashtag need more fossils situation.
Yeah, it sounds like some of these might be on the way to getting synonymized or nomen dubiumed.
Yes. But if they do all belong to the same animal, the author said that we could be addressing an animal with a very peculiar lifestyle. It would be this secondarily flightless bird with a bony tail, but it might be a good climber.
Oh, it might be a good climber. All right. There's something going on.
Well, yeah, because we're leaving Gargantuavis out of it.
Okay.
So yes, a possible synonymization. I suppose the name Elopteryx would be the one that sticks around.
Because that was the first one?
1913 versus 2010.
Unless they say that it was so fragmentary that it's not even worth using and nomen dubium it, and then you end up with Balaur.
Balaur, that name is a pretty good name.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Maybe they'll find more fossils.
Or actually, Gargantuavis was named in 1998, so that one could stick around too.
Well, that one's considered separate. They were just thinking there might be some bones that were referred to Gargantuavis that would be part of this.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But that name is safe for now.
Gotcha. That's good. Gargantuavis. Good name. And we'll get on to our dinosaur of the day, Miragaia, in just a moment. But first, we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break.
And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Miragaia, which is getting an update. This is a request from Dion Sukas via our Patreon and Discord, so thanks. There was a recent study, the latest study on Miragaia, that found that the species Miragaia longicollum was a synonym of Dacentrurus, and Dacentrurus was named first, and that another Miragaia species, Miragaia longispinus, is actually Alcovasaurus.
I didn't realize there was Miragaia longicollum and longispinus.
Yes.
That is a little rough.
So there's been a lot of papers on all three of these dinosaurs. So I'm going to go through each of them separately, and then we'll talk about the latest study that kind of both splits and lumps.
Okay.
But first, a bit about Stegosaurs, because we're keeping that Stegosaur theme going, because Miragaia was a Stegosaur, as was Dacentrurus and Alcovasaurus. So Stegosaurs, they're known for their plates and the spines on their backs and necks and tails. Again, they lived in the Middle Jurassic to Early Cretaceous, and they've been found in North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. The first Stegosaur fragments were found in the 1840s, and the first Stegosaur skeletons were found and described in the 1870s in North America and Europe. And most Stegosaurs are known from partial skeletons or fragments, which is too bad because they look pretty cool.
Yeah, maybe they were really tasty, though.
Oh, maybe. So I'll start with Dacentrurus because it was named first. And we did cover this dinosaur back in episode 252. We've got some updates here. So it was a stegosaur that lived in the late Jurassic and maybe the early Cretaceous of what is now Europe. It was the first stegosaur ever found and named, Dacentrurus armatus. It was named by Richard Owen in 1875, although at the time he named it Omosaurus. The genus name Omosaurus means upper arm and refers to its robust humerus. So originally it was Omosaurus, But then later it became Stegosaurus armatus, named by Richard Lydecker in 1890, and then it got renamed in 1902 as Dacentrurus. And it was renamed by Frederick Augustus because Omosaurus was already in use for a non-dinosaur.
Ah, I see. Okay. So we don't have to worry about Stegosaurus being a junior synonym and everybody having to call it Omosaurus from now on.
Yes.
That's good.
Omosaurus was a whole other thing. And, well, actually what happened with Richard Lydecker tried to solve the naming issue by renaming it to Stegosaurus armatus, but he didn't realize that Marsh had already named Stegosaurus armatus in 1877.
Oh, weird.
Yep. As for Omosaurus, the type species of Omosaurus is Omosaurus perplexus, and it was named by Joseph Leidy in 1856. It's now a dubious reptile, but lived in the late Triassic in what is now North Carolina in the US. And it was named based on teeth, vertebrae, ribs, and an osteoderm, which has been lost. The teeth were straight, cone-shaped, and pointed. Leidy thought that Omosaurus was a marine reptile and that the fossils might be referable to an animal that was already named.
You do get a lot of cone-shaped teeth in the ocean, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And then later he thought it was a crocodilian, but now it's thought to be possibly a phytosaur and also maybe a nomum dubium. Back to Omosaurus armatus, that was named in 1875 and then again later became Dacentrurus. That was named based on a skeleton found in Swindon, England. And the genus name, Dacentrurus, means tail full of points.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. And the species name armatus means armed, and it refers to the large spike that Owen thought was on the upper arm. Now, Omosaurus/Dacentrurus was kind of a wastebasket taxon. That happens a lot to dinosaurs named in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of species were named, but now only Dacentrurus armatus is considered to be valid.
So there's Dacentrurus armatus and Stegosaurus armatus?
Yes.
Oh, that's confusing.
Well, Stegosaurus armatus was a Bone Wars dinosaur, and the type specimen might be dubious.
Uh-oh.
But we're not talking about Stegosaurus today. Anyway, Miragaia longicollum may be a junior synonym of Dacentrurus armatus. I'll get to that in a minute. But Dacentrurus, the holotype, is incomplete, which made things extra confusing. That also tends to be the case with wastebasket taxon. Dacentrurus is estimated to be 26 to 30 feet, or about 8 to 9 meters long, and weigh up to 8 tons. And it had a broad gut, short hind limbs, so short legs, and relatively long forelimbs. It also had 12 neck bones and spines on the tail, and it probably had 2 rows of small plates on its neck and 2 rows of long spikes on the tail. The fossils were first found in 1874 in a clay pit in lumps of hardened clay. The holotype includes parts of the pelvis, back and tail vertebrae, a right femur, and some loose vertebrae.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah. They also found a nearly complete left arm, parts of the leg, a right neck plate, and a left tail spike. So it was found in Swindon, and this Swindon stegosaur is on display at the Natural History Museum in London. Although...
Not Sophie?
It's not Sophie, so it might not be as prominent.
Yeah. The other stegosaur.
Casts of the bones are probably going on display at the Swindon's new museum next year in 2025, so that's pretty cool. Fossils of Dacentrurus have been found in England, France, Spain, and Portugal. Many of them were fragmentary. There's also an egg referred to Dacentrurus found in Portugal that's about 125 millimeters long.
It's about 5 inches.
Mm-hmm. And that was found associated with stegosaur bones. I like when we can tell where the egg comes from.
Yeah, or probably in this case, because you don't have the little stegosaur embryo in it to really be sure.
True. Multiple stegosaurs were found over the years, including a partial skeleton in 1942 from Pedras Moetas in Portugal, which led to more interest in looking for fossils and dinosaurs in Portugal, so that's pretty cool. There's one skeleton that was thought to be a sauropod, Astrodon pusillus, but a later study in 1981 found it to be a juvenile stegosaur. I guess I could see how that might happen.
They're big herbivores, I guess.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Longish necks.
Yeah. I mean, they're all named longicollum, apparently, so.
Well, Miragaia did have a very long neck, but Anyway, in 1991, Peter Galton redescribed all the stegosaur fossils found and referred most of them to Dacentrurus armatus. And then in 2008, Susanna Maidment found that only the holotype was Dacentrurus armatus, and most of the named species were nomina dubia.
So there wasn't enough unique about them to justify a species or genus name.
At least at that time, because people have since changed their minds. Stegosaur vertebrae found in Spain were described as Dacentrurus armatus in 2013, and they helped show some variation in Dacentrurus. And in 2021, fossils from the Early Cretaceous of what is now France, parts of the brain case, vertebrae, and ribs, were assigned to Dacentrurus. Just to recap, there are a lot of Stegosaur fossils found in Europe that have been referred to Dacentrurus.
It's a good name meaning, but saying Dacentrurus is a little marble mouthy.
It is. It's not quite as easy to say as Miragaia, which
or Stegosaurus
came along next. Yeah, and actually you've got Dacentrurus, Stegosaurus, and Miragaia. Well, not so much Miragaia anymore. Those are the three Stegosaurs of Europe from the Jurassic. So before Miragaia, almost all Stegosaur specimens found in Portugal and Spain were classified as Dacentrurus armatus. And we did cover Miragaia back in episode 116, but, it was time for an update.
It's been like 8 years.
Well, and also new studies have come out. Miragaia was a stegosaur that lived in the late Jurassic in what is now Portugal, found in the Laurentian Formation, as well as Wyoming in the US, found in the Morrison Formation. This is not according to the latest study. So again, we're keeping the three stegosaurs separate for now. It was named in 2009 by Octavio Mateus, Susanna Maidment, and Nikolai Christensen. Being a stegosaur, it looked somewhat like Stegosaurus with plates on its neck, but it had a much longer neck, and it had spikes on the back.
Yeah, it's sort of famous for having the plates in the front and then transitioning to spikes halfway through. I've seen quite a few toys of Miragaia. I think it's one of the more popular stegosaurs.
I think the thing it's mostly known for, though, is its long neck. Because most stegosaurs had short necks for their bodies, but Miragaia had the longest known neck of any stegosaur with at least 17 neck bones.
Yes, it was long for a stegosaur, but not compared to like a sauropod, even the early sauropodomorphs.
Kinda. It had more neck bones than many sauropods.
Yeah, but I mean, giraffes and us have the same number of neck vertebrae. There's more to it than just counting the vertebrae.
That's true. It also had 8 more neck bones than the ancestors it evolved from, basal thyreophorians and ornithischians.
That is significant. Basically doubled the number of vertebrae.
Yeah.
Maybe it was real flexible neck.
Well, some of its neck bones used to be part of the upper back, but it evolved to function like neck bones.
Oh, interesting.
The long neck may mean that it could browse for food that other herbivores couldn't reach, or maybe it was used to attract mates. Miragaia was estimated to be about 20 to 21 feet or 6 to 6.5 meters long and weigh about 2 tons. It walked on all fours, had a small head, and a long tail that ended in spikes. It was thought to have shoulder spines, but later that was found to be part of the tail. So it had these 2 pairs of long tail spines, as well as a pair of triangular plates that ran down its neck, and a beak with no teeth at the tip of it. And it had a notch in the tip of the snout that was shaped like a W when you're looking at it from above. The type species is Miragaia longicollum. And there's 2 species, so longicollum, but also Miragaia longispinus. Although the second species is now considered to be Alcovasaurus. The genus name Miragaia is after the parish in Porto, Portugal, and the geologic unit where the fossils were found. And Miragaia means wonderful goddess of the earth.
I was wondering if it was the same Gaia that you hear about all the time.
Mm-hmm. And it is. And the species name longicollum means long neck in Latin. The holotype's a nearly complete front half of a skeleton with a partial skull. It includes most of the snout, parts of the jaws, 15 neck bones, back vertebrae, ribs, shoulder bones, most of the arms, and 13 bony plates plus a spike.
Nice.
The fossils were found while they were building a road between the villages Miragaia and Sobral.
So it could have been Sobralosaurus or...
Yeah, but I guess they're going for the geologic unit too.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Unfortunately, the back half of the skeleton was probably destroyed during construction.
Oh.
But that's like 2 sides of the coin, right? Because if it wasn't for the construction, they might not have found it at all.
Yeah, very true.
The fossils were excavated in August 1999 and 2001. And based on histology, this specimen would have been skeletally mature sometime between 21 to 25 years old. There was a juvenile found in the same location as the holotype, too, and that includes 2 partial back vertebrae and a partial pelvis. For a while, the holotype of Miragaia was thought to be Dacentrurus. And in the past, Miragaia longicollum has been known as Dacentrurus. And there's been debate over the years as to whether Miragaia is valid. In 2010, Alberto Cobos and others said that all the unique features of Miragaia were on the parts of the skeleton that were missing from the Dacentrurus holotype found in England, but they lived at the same time, and that in the bones that did overlap, the few that did, they looked the same.
Uh-oh.
So they suggested Miragaia was a junior synonym of Dacentrurus. And then in 2019, Francisco Costa and Octavio Mateus found Miragaia longicollum to be valid when they described a specimen that was found back in 1959, but it wasn't prepared until between 2015 to 2017. And that one is the most complete dinosaur found in Portugal, and it includes parts of the front and back half of the skeleton and tail bones.
Okay, nice.
The 2019 study also said that Alcovasaurus was a second species of Miragaia longispinus. So we went from it's Dacentrurus to no, there are 2 species of Miragaia. But then, 2024, this year, very recently, Sergio Sanchez Fenoyosa, Fernando Escaso, and Alberto Cobos found Miragaia longicollum to be a junior synonym of Dacentrurus, and for Alcovasaurus longispinus to be valid. But again, I will get into that after I tell you a little bit more about Miragaia and Alcovasaurus. So going back to the 2019 study, they described a recently prepared, pretty complete stegosaur that was found in the Lourinhã Formation in Portugal, known as MG4863. It had been in storage for a while and not prepared, and there were no field notes about it, so it was only identified by the label Atoua da Baleia, and some of the fossils were mixed in with unprepared material of the holotype of Dracopelta, which is an ankylosaur. But then the fossils were rediscovered in 2009, and as part of a 2015 thesis, they were eventually almost fully prepared and studied, and the fossils of Miragaia were found to be from the same individual. Again, it's the most complete dinosaur described in Portugal, and the most complete stegosaur found in Europe, and one of the most complete stegosaurs found in the world as of 2019. Many of the bones did break or they were crushed or twisted, but it was still pretty well preserved. They found this specimen to be a young adult, not fully grown, based on details in the neck vertebrae and lack of visible sutures. And they called it the Rosetta Stone specimen, because with this new specimen, the skeleton of Miragaia was now almost fully known. We were just missing the back and tail osteoderms. They found that this individual, again, MG4863, had the same characters as Miragaia longicollum and could be distinguished from Dacentrurus, so it was referred to Miragaia longicollum. It had 4 parts of sacral ribs, which in some stegosaurs has been suggested to indicate males, and that 5 pairs were more likely females. But the number of vertebrae fused together to form the sacral rod varies in stegosaurs, so it's not clear if this specimen's actually male.
So basically the number of fused vertebrae between the hips was a little bit different?
Yes.
Maybe between males and females. And this one had the male number.
Yes. 4 versus 5. It also had 45 tail vertebrae.
Nice.
And large spines over most or the whole of its tail. So based on this specimen and the holotype of Miragaia, that 2019 study found a lot of detailed features, 29 characters, that were different from Dacentrurus, and they said that the 2 dinosaurs were separate and valid. And that specimen now, that Rosetta Stone Miragaia, is on display at the Lisbon Geology Museum. And then that 2019 study also found a lot of similarities between Miragaia and Alcovasaurus longispinus, which is why they renamed Alcovasaurus longispinus as Miragaia longispinus, and how we ended up for a while with Miragaia being on 2 continents.
I see. Okay. Because they were 2 different species of the same genus, not the exact same species on two continents.
Right, yeah, because you got one species, longicollum, found in Europe, and then the other, longispinus, found in the US, North America. So that brings me to Alcovasaurus. That was a stegosaur that lived in the late Jurassic in what is now Wyoming in the US, found in the Morrison Formation. It's estimated to be about 21 feet or 6.5 meters long and weigh almost 4 tons or maybe up to 5 tons. It had a sacrum connected by 6 pairs of sacral ribs, compared to other stegosaurs that had 4 or 5. And it had a flexible tail. The longest spike on its tail was 34 inches or 86 centimeters long, but the point was broken, so it may have been up to almost 39 inches or 99 centimeters long.
That is very long. That's also only the bone part, so if you add a keratin covering onto that, which it almost certainly had, you've got like a full-on spear.
Oh, yes.
Going.
Watch out for that tail spike. The fossils were found back in 1908. It was a partial skeleton near Alcova in Wyoming. They were described in 1914 by Charles Whitney Gilmore as Stegosaurus longispinus. So it's gone through a lot of names. Miragaia longispinus, Alcovasaurus longispinus. Before that, it was Natronosaurus. Before that, it was Kentrosaurus. And then before that, Stegosaurus. The name Natronosaurus didn't stick because it was published in a self-published ebook that didn't have an ISSN. So, anyway,
wasn't official enough.
Not official enough. The fossils include 42 vertebrae, part of the pelvis, the right femur, several ribs, and tail spines. The type specimen, unfortunately, of Alcovasaurus was damaged in the late 1920s when water pipes at the University of Wyoming burst, and there was some water damage. It was thought to be lost, but there's still a right femur and plaster casts of the tail spikes, as well as photos, so that's something. And in 2016, Peter Galton and Kenneth Carpenter re-examined the photos and the fossils, and that's when they named it the new genus Alcovasaurus.
Okay, so it was named based on pictures because they don't have much of anything left.
And the right femur and the casts of the tail spikes. They also referred a large round spike base to Alcovasaurus, which was lost, but there is a cast that was found in the 1990s.
Must have been quite a flood to almost destroy a whole Stegosaurus skeleton.
Yeah, it's too bad.
He's at 42 vertebrae. That's a lot.
Yeah. Plus the tail spines.
Mm-hmm.
So the type species was named in 2016 Alcovasaurus longispinus. The genus name refers to Alcova, Wyoming, and the species name longispinus means long spine.
Yep.
But again, then just 3 years later, we had that study that found it to be Miragaia longispinus instead of Alcovasaurus longispinus.
So it wasn't known for a long neck and not that kind of spine. A long spine as in a long...
tail spine.
Yeah, spike.
Yeah, a spike. And then 5 years later, that brings me to this most recent study from this year, which was published in the Zoological Journal of the Linnaean Society. And I want to thank Sergio for sending us the paper. Thank you so much, because that kind of kicked off this whole segment. The gist is that Miragaia longicollum is now Dacentrurus armatus, and Miragaia longispinus is back to Alcovasaurus longispinus.
So they axed Miragaia completely.
Yes, and that means that the stegosaurs of the late Jurassic of Europe are now just Dacentrurus and Stegosaurus. So how did we get here? Well, there's a new stegosaur specimen from San Cristobal site in Teruel, Spain, found in the Villar del Arzobispo formation. The fossils were found in situ, which is always exciting, and it's one individual. It was discovered in 2005 and then partially excavated in 2007, and then it was taken to a museum. More bones were later excavated and prepared, but they remain on site. They're part of this museum and tourist project called Dinosaur Route. So that means some of the fossils are in the field, and researchers and visitors can see it in this permanent exhibit. It's covered by a protective building. It means if you want to see this stegosaur, you can.
Those are always fun to go see when you can.
Yeah.
Sort of like Dinosaur National Monument, but they got their own going in Spain now.
Yeah. As for the fossils that they prepared, those include 10 back vertebrae, several ribs, bones from the sacrum, which are around the lower back, bones from the hips, and a thigh bone and shin bone, the femur and tibia. In the study, the team re-examined all known specimens of Dacentrurus and Miragaia, including the new specimen. So there's 11 individuals in all.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah. And this study described all the fossils in detail and then compared them also to other stegosaurs. So like I said, Miragaia has been debated before, and even the authors who described Miragaia later said that it could be Dacentrurus of some sort of species.
Oh, I didn't realize that this was always in the cards, potentially.
Yeah. Miragaia was established as a separate species from Dacentrurus because there just weren't enough overlapping fossils found, so you couldn't really compare the two dinosaurs. And because of this, the authors of this newest 2024 paper said that that makes things uncertain. And they also said that the few fossils that do overlap look the same. So this new specimen is known as CT28. It has features seen in Dacentrurus specimens and Miragaia specimens, so it helps fill in the gaps and answer questions. Maybe that makes it Rosetta Stone 2 or something. They found that some of the features that made Miragaia unique were due to individual variation and could be affected by the position of vertebrae being misidentified, like where in the series it was located, as well as things just happening in the fossilization process that distorted the bones.
Yeah, those are two big problems.
Yes.
Because when you're talking about a neck versus a back vertebrae, and you were saying, especially in Miragaia, it looked like these back vertebrae turned into neck vertebrae, and if you're classifying them differently, then it's not going to be a unique neck anymore.
They do still say it's got at least 17 neck vertebrae.
Okay, cool.
They did find a few examples of individual variation among all the specimens. For example, there's 4 sacral vertebrae in the holotype of Dacentrurus, but there's 5 sacral vertebrae in other individuals. That's not unusual since it's seen in other stegosaurs, including Stegosaurus, Stenops, and Kentrosaurus. The authors did say that more specimens are needed, so need more fossils to help further clarify, but there is still unpublished material which can give more insights. They did update the features that make Dacentrurus, and they found that there are 10 unique features based on the holotype and the referred specimens, and that includes details in the tail bones, for example, having short neural spines, as well as details in the pelvic area, having at least the 17 neck bones, the tip of the snout being drawn into a point, and other details in the neural spines and vertebrae. They also found that there were fewer similarities between Alcovasaurus and Miragaia than Miragaia and Dacentrurus, especially with this new CT28 specimen, and they found unique features in Alcovasaurus, so now it's considered to be a separate genus. It makes Alcovasaurus valid again. So that's how we got to now we've just got Dacentrurus and Alcovasaurus, no more Miragaia, according to the latest paper.
Because they found a new, really complete individual, which at first it was like, oh, look at this really complete Miragaia. And then upon closer inspection, it was like, wait a second, that doesn't look that much like Miragaia. Or that Miragaia looks a little bit too much like Dacentrurus.
Yes. Well, I don't know what their initial thoughts were, just the conclusions. So yeah, now we know a lot more about these stegosaurs.
And we'll get into our Dino-all challenge with our third puzzle right after a word from our sponsors. And now on to our Dino-all challenge. We're into our third week of puzzles, and we have an update from the first week. The fastest person to figure out that the park ranger spotted a Maiasaura was Skylar. So congratulations to Skylar.
Awesome. I think it was very fast, within the hour.
Yeah, at first I was looking at the wrong time zone, and I thought it took a little over 7 hours, but then I realized that was in GMT, and I think in Pacific time, it was actually just about 40 minutes after it came out. And I think the puzzle is about 40 minutes in. So well done, Skylar. Must have listened to it almost immediately.
And we're recording this episode a little bit early, so we don't have the puzzle 2 fastest answerer yet.
No, but we do have part 2 of the puzzle from the first puzzle.
Oh, yes.
And that was the fastest patron to figure out that the hiker spotted a Triceratops. And that was also Skylar.
Amazing.
So well done.
Yes, thank you, Skylar.
A double win. Next week, we'll announce more people who are the fastest to answer puzzles. But getting into this week's puzzle, we're in Casper, Wyoming. Wildlife control, what's your emergency? I've got a large armored animal stuck in my garage. It's early evening, and one resident of Casper, Wyoming, returns home after a long day's work, only to find the largest, strangest animal he's ever seen in his garage. It looks like a pangolin or an armadillo, but much larger and spikier. The animal doesn't seem to mind the garage being open. In fact, it barely notices, instead stuffing its snout with emergency kit rations that were in the corner of the room. It hasn't eaten much, if anything, yet, but it has torn open many of the boxes, flinging the contents all over the garage. Whoa, an Ankylosaurus! A kid next door sees the club at the end of the tail and immediately recognizes the dinosaur. He rushes past the man to get a closer look at the dinosaur. The running child startles the Ankylosaurus, and it attempts to spin its tail around to defend itself. Unfortunately, the club bashes partway through the wall of the garage, wedging the tail between the damaged boards. Seeing the violent crash, the boy freezes, then runs towards his house. With the perceived threat gone, the Ankylosaurus momentarily calms down. But when it attempts to turn back to explore more emergency rations, it finds its tail is stuck and it can't get back to its food. It thrashes its tail violently to the side, knocking out several studs in the wall. Then it swings the tail back to the other side, taking out most of the rest of the wall. Suddenly, the entire wall collapses down, leaving one side of the garage crumpled on the Ankylosaurus' tail and hips. The wildlife control team arrives quickly. They need to calm the dinosaur down fast. They have tranquilizers in their truck, but need to decide on the dosage quickly. It looks to be about 30 feet long, putting it on the larger end of the scale for an Ankylosaurus. So the question is, about how much does the Ankylosaurus weigh? And if you want to answer that question, you can go to bit.ly/dinochallenge504. There's also a link in the show notes. And then for our patrons, as the bonus scene, after administering the sedative, the rescue team quickly gets to work removing the garage off of the top of the Ankylosaurus. A half hour later, most of the weight has been shifted off the dinosaur. Suddenly, the Ankylosaurus lets out a shudder and one eye slowly opens. Either the Ankylosaurus is naturally resistant to the sedative, or its metabolism is much faster than animal control calculated. The Ankylosaurus slowly rises up and surveys its surroundings. The first responders all back up to the sidewalk. The dinosaur scratches at the ground as if attempting to dig, but the concrete is too tough for its claws. With half of the garage mostly gone now, it can see into the backyard. It stumbles over to a patch of dirt under a wide tree and positions its body over the dirt. Then it begins vigorously digging out a shallow area using all four of its legs. Once a foot or two of dirt is excavated, it lies down into it, hiding its legs and soft underbelly in the earth. Only the spiky armored surface is now exposed. The first responders are at a loss for how to move this massive animal. Animal control would typically try to scare it off with the urine from its natural predator. Which animal's pheromones should they look for? There's a few potential dinosaur options, and they're all on our Patreon page, which you can get to by, again, going through bit.ly/dinochallenge504. And again, if you'd like the complete rules and terms and conditions for this giveaway, you can head to bit.ly/dinochallenge24. As a quick summary, we're giving away a grand prize package to one lucky listener, and it includes a large Spinosaurus tooth, courtesy of Mini Museum, a fossilized leaf from the Eocene, courtesy of Ancient Odysseys, a signed poster, courtesy of Why Dinosaurs, as well as some captives color change eggs from Toy Monster. So hopefully everybody's enjoying this trivia game. We just wanted to come up with something new and fun to do, and I guess we'll see how well it's received.
Yeah, we had fun creating it.
Yeah.
So good luck for those who are trying to get shout outs for being the fastest ones to answer. And now on to our fun fact, which again is that the ceratopsian Protoceratops may not have been the inspiration behind the legendary Griffin. This was written up by Mark Whitten and Richard Hing in Interdisciplinary Science Reviews, which is open access, so if you want to read the full paper, we'll have a link in our show notes. Mark Whitten also had a blog post about this back in 2016, and this paper builds upon it. So he might have mentioned this before.
I think we did.
Well, more than 30 years ago, back in the 90s,
the 1990s.
The 1990s, Adrian Mayer suggested, actually it's first in a 1989 paper, and then a 1993 paper, and then in her book, The First Fossil Hunters in 2000, that the dinosaur Protoceratops was the inspiration for the Griffin. And eventually this reached documentaries and museum exhibits and other books, so it became a pretty widespread idea. A griffin is a legendary creature. It's got the body, tail, and back legs of a lion, and the head and wings of an eagle with talons on the front legs. It's considered to be powerful and majestic, and it appears in multiple cultures. It's been found in Egypt, the Middle East, Greece, just to name a few, sometimes in different forms. It was thought to guard gold.
Interesting. I never realized that it was found outside of ancient Greek and Roman mythology.
Yeah, all over. But again, in slightly different forms sometimes. And then Protoceratops, for me, I'm more familiar with Protoceratops. I don't know if that's true for everyone who is listening.
Compared to griffins?
Yeah.
You didn't know about griffins on like flags and all sorts of different things?
I did, but I know a lot more about Protoceratops.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, Protoceratops is a real animal, so it has that going for it.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to learn about it.
But as a quick overview, it's a small, cute ceratopsian. It lived in the late Cretaceous in what's now Asia. I would say, actually, it's relatively small because it could grow up to 8 feet or 2.5 meters long and weigh up to over 200 pounds or over 100 kilograms.
Small compared to mythical griffins, for sure.
Yeah, and other ceratopsians. It walked on all fours, and it had a large skull and a neck frill.
No horns, though.
No horns. And it's one of the dinosaurs in the Fighting Dinosaurs, where it's locked in battle with Velociraptor. So the idea is that it's possible that Central Asian merchants saw the bones, some with nests of Protoceratops, and shared in their travels. And there were nomads who mined gold who may have seen Protoceratops and spread the word. And then the Greeks might have equated them with Griffin artwork they already knew about from other sources. If Protoceratops was the inspiration, then it could be the beaked skull was like the eagle's head, the wings could be the neck frill or shoulder blades, and the taloned hands could be the claws. There's also lore that griffins were nest-building egg layers, based on fossil eggs in areas where Protoceratops was found. Potentially, it was thought to belong to Protoceratops, although now we know that it's mostly Oviraptor who
Yeah,
were
or
laying those eggs.
Chittipati or some other Oviraptorid.
Yeah, the egg thieves that were protecting their eggs.
Yeah.
So it could be that being in contact with people from Central Asia made the Greeks interested in griffins. But it could also be that they grew interested in the griffin in the 8th century BCE because they were strongly influenced by the Near East and their art. Protoceratops inspiring the griffin is thought to be an example of geomythology. That's a term that was coined back in 1968, and it's the study of oral and written traditions that were made, often in poetry or imagery, to account for things like earthquakes, floods, land formation, and fossils. So in this paper, the authors compared the geomyth with details of archaeology, history, geology, and paleontology, and they said, quote, Mayer's Griffin geomyth is built on a complicated and multifaceted argument, the nature of which renders some passages confusing or even contradictory. Before Protoceratops, there were 2 other animals that were considered to be the inspiration for the griffin. The large horned giraffid, Samotherium, but didn't have a beak, and Triceratops. But Triceratops didn't exist in what's now Europe or Asia.
Yeah, plus Triceratops has huge horns, and the griffin doesn't.
So the conclusion of this paper is that Protoceratops inspiring the griffin is just speculation and it seems unlikely that it did inspire the griffin. However, fossils have been used for decoration, for talismans, and have inspired myths and legends. For example, ammonites in Britain are known as snake stones. There are shark teeth thought to be snake tongues, and brachiopods, which had hard shells and look a bit like clams, are known as stone swallows in China. In the paper, the authors made a lot of interesting points, and they go into great detail about how they came to this conclusion, but I'll just go briefly over some of them. So, to start, it seems unlikely that Protoceratops was associated with guarding gold, because Protoceratops fossils have been found very far from the nearest gold deposits, like hundreds of kilometers away. And there are a lot of fossil sites near the gold, but those are just not sites where Protoceratops is known from.
It reminds me a little bit of that Daspletosaurus argument with anagenesis, where it's like you have to be more precise in your times. You have to be really precise in your locations. In this case, just saying that there are gold mines in Mongolia and there's Protoceratops in Mongolia isn't enough to say that they're associated.
Yeah. It also seems unlikely that people just passing by, like the nomadic gold miners, would notice a Protoceratops fossil. Although I was wondering when I read that, like, is that actually like that in the Gobi? Because in the Gobi Desert, fossils are pretty easy to find. Although you still need to prepare them and remove them to see the details. Otherwise, you just see parts of the bone.
Yeah, and the Gobi Desert has easier to prepare sandstone than a lot of places, but that's people that know what they're looking for.
Right.
And if you're looking for gold, do you really care about some white rock? Probably not.
Maybe not, unless it's shimmering, maybe.
Yeah.
Light hits it the right way.
You could have a chance encounter where you're like camping and you run into it or something.
Yeah. So you do need to have an eye for fossils or be looking for them in a lot of cases. As I mentioned, griffins also come in a variety of forms, different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're two-legged winged lions with human heads. Sometimes they're humans with wings and bird heads. Sometimes they have long necks like dragons. Sometimes they have no wings and it's a human head on a lion body. And sometimes it's a lion body with a bird head.
Just like every combination. It's like one of those books, but you have a human, a lion, a bird, and you do the middle part, the front part, and the back part of whichever combination you can imagine.
Yeah, and then throw in a few other things, like sometimes the tails are like birds, but sometimes the tails are like cats.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the bird heads are like eagles, and sometimes they're like peafowls or falcons. So there's a question of, could the differences in appearances be due to broken fossils, or could the differences be due to different scenarios, like the wings are to show swiftness or divinity, for example, just depending on what point you're trying to get across.
Yeah.
Also, just speaking of griffin anatomy, it's different parts of modern animals, like birds and lions, so it doesn't necessarily need a prehistoric animal as inspiration.
Yeah. That definitely seems like the most parsimonious or the simplest explanation for it. If you have these existing living animals that are clearly being combined, why would a Protoceratops be the inspiration for it? And you could say, well, it's because we don't have an animal today that's the combination of those things. And when you look at a Protoceratops, maybe they combined those things, which I guess maybe you could say because Protoceratops did have more of a claw than you see on some animals with beaks today. But I don't know, bird feet and claws go together along with the beak. So yeah, and it doesn't seem necessary. You're right.
Yeah, and then their last point was that the Protoceratops and Griffin link seems to ignore Griffin lore before the 7th century BCE, because one of the oldest known images of a griffin comes from Susa, which is an ancient city in what's now Iran, from the 4th millennium BCE.
Oh, wow. So like over 3,000 years before.
Which is way before the direct contact between the Greeks and merchants from Central Asia.
Yeah, these nomadic gold finders.
Yeah. So as far as I know, Adrian Mayer has not responded to this paper yet. It'll be interesting. We'll keep an eye out to see if anything develops.
Yeah, like you said, there are some other interesting stories and connections between dinosaurs and other fossils and mythology or other sorts of folklore. It just doesn't seem like the griffin and Protoceratops are one of those cases.
Yeah, it might not be.
It's unfortunate.
It is.
I don't know if there are any good cases of actual fossilized bones and our current depiction of dinosaurs being integrated into folklore. There's a lot of cases of tracks, like we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some cases of, I guess, just individual bones that people thought were maybe from some huge animal similar to today's animal. But it shouldn't really be too surprising to us that people thousands of years ago didn't have this accurate version of a protoceratops that they were just using half of. Because if you look at just 150 years ago, our depiction of what dinosaurs look like, we're way off.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a lot of effort to reconstruct these dinosaurs. You have to be lucky enough to find it too.
Yes.
And then for that to also get combined into the folklore, it's a lot of steps.
It is a lot of steps. But it's interesting to study these things.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. In our next episode, we'll be unraveling some mysteries and answering listener questions. And of course, we will have the next puzzle in our Dino-all challenge. And again, if you want all of the details for the Dino-all challenge, head over to bit.ly/dinochallenge24. Thanks again, and until next time.
Could tell from watching me walk, I'm a dinosaur.